Okay, well, good day, everybody, and welcome back to our Zowe Quarterly Update webinar series. I am Rose Saketch, the Zowe Onboarding Squad Lead. I will be your host for this 1-hour webinar. And before we get started, just a quick review of what we want to cover in this quarterly update. We'll cover a focused topic, and we have a guest speaker for that. I'll introduce Sean in a minute. And then if we have some time afterwards, we'll provide you with some news, what's going on with Zowe in general and some upcoming events. That's how we're going to run this quarterly update. Going forward, what we hope to do is transition to a little bit of a different format where we'll focus more on some of the technology and what was just released with the various Zowe version 2 continuous deliveries. We'll talk more about what we're currently working on, and then time permitting, some plans for the future. We're going to try that new format going forward. But for today, we're going with the Zowe App Store. That will be our focus topic. Sean Grady will be presenting that. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to Sean. Attendee microphones are muted. Obviously, we're not. If you have a question, please feel free to post in either the chat or the Q&A. I will be trying to manage that as Sean progresses. The webinar is being recorded for replay and will be available at the OMP YouTube channel. Just look for the Zowe Quarterly Update in the playlist. And then, yeah, if we run out of time and there are still questions, we'll do our best to respond to those and get back to who asked as soon as we can. So with that, I will turn it over to Sean.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen here, and then we can get started.
All right.
So, as you all may have seen, the title of this webinar is the Zowe App Store. And what this really means is that we now have better support for what we call Zowe package registries. And I'll get into what that really is. You know, what is a package registry? What makes a Zowe package registry special from a different one? And what does this mean for the App Store? Basically, the App Store needs package registries as an underpinning. So this is part of a bigger solution. So we'll go over where we came from. You know, what was the state of package handling prior to this enhancement, and then what is this enhancement? How can you use it as an end user? How can you use it as a developer? And what you can expect in the future. So I'll just get right into the as-is state of things. So for those of you who don't know, Zowe now has 2 editions, version 1 and version 2. And this whole presentation focuses on version 2. When I say that this page is the as-is of server extension management, I would say that version 2 is even more elegant than version 1 in this regard. And with this enhancement, it's even better. So if you haven't tried out V2, now's your chance. And some of the enhancements that we're thinking about for making extension management even better may come in V3, which is something that you can look forward to next year. So let's look at this as is. Basically, there's 2 sides to Zowe, you could say. Zowe servers and Zowe clients. Servers being things that you put on ZOS, or basically things that you don't put on your PC. And with regards to the Zowe server install, for lack of a better name for it, it's a collection of different servers and their extensions. Each part of the Zowe server install is called a component, and extensions are components too. They follow the same standard manifest and API declaration, but they're just installed on top of Zowe. So if you ever see the word components with regards to this stuff, at the bottom of the screen, you see if there's component commands. You could think of this as components or extensions. So yeah. So anyway, ZWE is a command line tool, but it's not the Zowe CLI. It is a CLI for Zowe's servers. What it can do for the servers is help to install and run them, but also to manage them and to manage extensions. So ZWE breaks down into subcommands, and if you want to install a product on top of Zowe v2, the simplest command that you can do here is ZWE components install, and the -o command is shorthand for give me a path to an extension. And you can see that once a component is installed, you can manage it. You can say that you want to enable or disable it by giving its name. And recently, we added new features to these commands. I think in Zowe 2.5, we added upgrade, which is basically install again, install on top of your existing extension, and to uninstall. So these are all fairly routine when it comes to extension management, so nothing too shocking here yet. But there are some challenges with this. So the first challenge that we saw is that when you go to install or upgrade, you need to provide a path to either an archive, such as a PAX or a zip, or a folder. But either way, you need to have this extension already on your computer. So the first question comes in as, where did you find this archive or folder to even put on your mainframe? And wherever you found it, was it from a trustworthy source? How do you prove this? If you're using FTP, there's not necessarily a paper trail of how it got there. So how do you know that that this is software that you should be installing? So the second thing here is ZWE doesn't know whether or not the thing that you're about to install depends on some other extension. ZWE and the sort of Zowe server component manifest doesn't have a notion of dependency tracking yet, but that is something that we're thinking about doing in V3. So perhaps we'll have an even better solution next year in a future webinar, but we have a pretty good solution for it now, as you'll see later. The other question that we could have is, this thing that you're about to install, do you know that it's the latest version? And if there's a newer version that comes out, how will you be informed that an update is available? And then there's other questions that you get into later on, such as if you have a Zowe server set up for one group in your company and it has 10 plugins or 10 extensions, and you have a Zowe install for a different group in your company that has 20 extensions and they're a different set, how do you easily install all the extensions that you need and sort of duplicate them out throughout your different Zowe instances? Do you have to do a lot of manual steps, or is there an easier way to do that? So those are all questions that we were thinking of when we were trying to come up with a better solution. And when we come to the client, we see the beginnings of a better solution already. So on client programs such as Zowe CLI or the Zowe Explorers, the ways that you manage extensions varies because some of the Zowe clients are tightly integrated with some other program, like the Visual Studio Code Explorer is going to be using Visual Studio Code's extension marketplace, and I would assume the same of the IntelliJ Explorer. So the way in which extensions in the client space work varies to be whatever best fit there is. But in the case of the CLI, you see at the very least that it comes from a similar point of view as the server side, in that you can have an archive or a folder and install a plugin. There's a command here, Zowe plugins install, that you can use for that. But you're not limited to just providing an archive. The Zowe plugins install command here, sorry, there should be a O in the Zowe plugins install. It can be given a package name rather than a path. And if so, it will search for what you requested in a package registry. So, does that solve some of the previous problems that I pointed out? And if it does, could we do the same for the server code? So that's kind of what this webinar is about. You can see here this thing that I keep on referring to, package registries. What are they? They might be known by a better term, software repository. But it's basically, think about it as a storage location for software packages in some kind of standard. All the things in the repository conform to some manifest of attribute information. So that could include version numbers, the author that wrote the software, or even its dependencies. And so in this little diagram here, let's say that you have some clients and you want to install software on these clients. The software could come from somewhere, right? Some company, or perhaps if it's open source, you might find it on GitHub. But you're not going to be directly downloading them from GitHub or the company's internal Git repository, but rather there's some intermediate step. There's a company portal, perhaps, but even better would be a package registry, because then you could have many such pieces of software side by side and get to choose which ones that you install. And these registries, there are quite a bit of them in the wild, but they're usually domain specific. So you could think of, if you're a Linux user, you may have used yum or apt to install software on a Linux box. That's a package registry, but it's specific to installing Linux programs. These programs don't exist, for example, for Windows. But there are other types. Programming languages, more and more these days, are tightly bound to package registries for libraries. So if you're a Node.js developer, you're probably going to use npm to get some cool library. And the same is true if you are using Python. You've probably used pip before. So those technologies themselves are more or less web servers. You're getting some sort of software from a web server via some sort of API that makes it easy to query and manage. But that API needs to be understood by something you have on your computer. So package registries are often intertwined with software to manage them called package managers. And generally, an apt package manager matches with an apt web server somewhere, and same for npm and pip and so on. So that's sort of the basics there. And the interesting thing to the Zowe code base is the package managers themselves. So we were looking at package managers, which ones are out there, what they do. But essentially, if we're going to try and grab some content off of a package registry using Zowe, we either need to make our own client or utilize one that already exists and understand the features and limitations of each. So when we looked at all the types of package registries and package managers out there, we saw a lot of common themes. Many of them have a command for searching to discover a program that you're interested in installing, which follows up with an install command and later an upgrade command. And the interesting thing about install and upgrade is usually they have a notion of dependency tracking such that if program A depends on program B and you ask to install program A, it's going to install both of them because it knows that both are required. And when you go to do an upgrade, package managers tend to be smart enough to know that you can only upgrade to the newest version that is compatible with whatever other software you have installed so that it doesn't break anything. And removing similarly should be tracking dependencies so that you get automatic cleanup of things that you no longer need. So this feature set's pretty common across the board and is very useful to us. But also important to us is the mainframe is a very secure environment. So we don't just want to download content off of the internet without verifying it. And the nice thing about package managers is that they can target a registry even if it's not on the internet. You can set up an on-premises registry. Obviously, a lot of software that you purchase comes from the internet at some point, but you could have an administrator take that software and put it on a curated mirror inside of your company so that the things that you pull onto your box are already vetted. Package managers can even just point at registries that are on your own computer, which is good for testing. So this gets to the meat of the presentation here, which is we enhance the Zowe server code with package registry support. So starting in Zowe 2.5, the ZWB commands for components can now take some new arguments to work with package registries. The package registry that I will be showing you today is that ZWB is compatible with NPM now, which means that server extensions to Zowe can be put on an NPM registry and ZWE can install from one of those. Zowe, the organization, has not put anything on npmjs.com for Zowe servers at this time. We do have some stuff there for Zowe CLI plugins, but to my knowledge, the server stuff is at this point only available on the second link here, the zowe.jfrog.io. This, you can point your NPM program at this address instead of npmjs.com to find some of the Zowe server content. And likewise, that Zowe JFrog link there is just, at the end of the day, it's just a setup of Artifactory. So if you have Artifactory in your organization, you can do the same thing that we did, and you can have your own registry to pull your favorite Zowe extensions onto your ZOS machines. So ZWE also contains an API for adding support for things other than NPM. I mentioned before that a lot of package registries all do the same things, more or less. So if you have a different favorite one, if instead of using NPM, you want to use Artifactory directly, or I don't know, there's so many out there, pip, mavid, conda, etc. Support can be added, and you don't even need to wait for Zowe to add such support because the API can be pointed at a registry handler that you design, so you can add support if you need. The ZWE command can point at multiple registries for different operations. So you could install product A from company A's NPM registry and product B from company B's registry, the only thing that you have to be careful about is that if products have dependencies, all of the dependencies need to be found on the same registry because of the way that we're invoking the NPM command. Maybe different APIs and handlers don't have this limitation, but that is the case for the NPM one at least. So just coming back to the problems that I had at the beginning of the presentation, here's our solutions. So originally I said, gee, it's not great that ZWE needs to be pointed at an archive or folder of an extension. And the solution here is, well, you can still do that if you want to, but you don't need to, because every argument that takes a path can now instead include a query to a package manager. And if you do that, then the question of where did you find that extension and do you trust it is, well, you got the extension that you got from whatever registry you chose. And so that now means that the trust shifts from you have to trust in programs that you don't know where they came from versus, oh, now you know that it came from this registry. And so you have to know that that registry is trustworthy. And if it is an on-premises registry, then you're in good shape. Dependency management is resolved. You don't need to read documentation or do manual steps here because NPM at the very least will automatically install all the dependencies that you need. So instead of installing 5 extensions to get one working, if it needs all 5, it will install all 5 automatically. NPM at the very least, among other package managers, can be queried to find out if there's updates available. So after you have installed something, you can run the npm upgrade command, or sorry, the ZWE upgrade command to see if there's anything available, and then commit to it if you want. There's dry run modes. And finally, if you have a workflow where you need to install a whole bunch of extensions and slightly different Zowe setups, hopefully we find that these component installation commands will make that whole task easier because it will result in less manual steps needed. So I do have a demo that I'm going to show it all working, but first I want to talk about how do you even turn this feature on. This feature is off by default because we don't know which registry you want to use. Like I mentioned, we have one that is the official Zowe one, but it's a good idea for you first to do whatever research you need to settle on a registry that you want to use. And then you can put that into your Zowe YAML configuration file. Now, if you have multiple registries or you need to switch between them often, every ZWE components command has a -- registry or -- handler parameters, and those can be used to be explicit rather than to use whatever defaults that you've coded into your config file. So -- handler specifies which type of package registry are you working with, such as NPM. And it's tied to a specific implementation of how to talk with that registry. Whereas the -- registry flag tells you which one you're going to. Are you going to npmjs.com? Are you going to zoe.jfrog.io? In the case of NPM, it's HTTPS URLs. In the case of other handlers, who knows? They might support other different protocols. So anything could be there. If you want to take a look at these parameters and more, you should take a look at this particular link here, the Zowe YAML schema document. Let's see if I can go over to the browser really quickly to show you what that looks like. because the schema document is something that you might want to look at for reasons other than this, all kinds of reasons. If you go into the setup documentation and check out the configuring section of the servers, one of the things that it's going to talk about here is the configuration manager. And in here, you will see that Zowe configuration files do validation on your parameters to figure out whether or not you've made any typos or if what you're typing in is valid for Zowe. And so within the server base one, if we take a look at that, we will find this new registry parameter. Looks like my internet might be going a little bit slow here, so bear with me. But oh, now it's loading. Okay, so if I type in, I'll make it a little bit bigger too. If I type in extension registry, here's the new section that controls all of this. So basically, you specify a default handler, such as npm, and a list of handlers. So in each handler section, there is a section that says that you need to provide a default registry, some URL perhaps, and a path to the registry handler, which is how you're able to have third-party ones if you want, although the npm one is built in. So let's go back to that and look at our configuration now. We see that if I were to enable this feature for my Zowe servers, I would just need to add this extension registry section and type in npm here. And you can see that I've put in the registry to Zowe's official one. And for the path thing here, you will notice that I have $ and then 2 curly braces, Zowe.runtime directory. This is a recent feature of Zowe v2, which allows you to have substitutions in your config file so you don't have to type as many of the same value at once or to make the values more portable. So in the case of the path here, I am essentially saying this npm handler is built into Zowe, so you should find it wherever Zowe is. And that's a pretty cool feature that you can read about on our docs website. So anyway, with that config, you can see now that if I just said ZWE components install database product, that it's going to be able to search for it. And if I need to be more explicit on using some on-premises registry for particular product that's different from where the rest of my content is stored, perhaps, then you can put -- registry there if you want. So let me show you a demo of basically all that I talked about today. I'm going to be installing a sample app, which is actually something that we have on our registry right now. I did this demo this morning. And so you can see here, I don't have any sample apps installed yet in the extensions folder. But if I look at my Zowe.yaml, I see that I have the handler configuration set up and ready to go. So I'm just pointing out here that I have the npm entry, and I'm pointing it at the Zowe official one. And then, of course, the substitution here that I said that I'm using Zowe.runtime directory would point to my other longer Zowe configuration file in which I have that defined, similar to how I have cookie identifier up there defined to the entry a few lines down that just says SG. So if oh, there it is. There's my runtime directory. So anyway, getting over to the ZWE command here, any command you do in ZWE, if you type in --help, it'll print out the commands that you could do with it. So ZWE components --help is going to tell you that there's all these subcommands like install and enable, etc. And search is the new command for registries that'll help me find something that I could install. So I'm just going to search not for the Angular sample, but instead for the React sample, because that one depends on the Angular sample, and I'd like to see it install both for me. So if I just search for the word sample, it says, hey, I'm calling the handler npm because that's what you configured. And I see partial matches. I see that there's a few different samples, one of which is for the Zowe CLI. So there needs to be some way to distinguish that what you see is meant for the servers or the CLI or something else. And that's something that at the moment might be done by parameters in the packages themselves or by naming scheme, but in the future, I think we'll add more intelligence to make it a more unified approach. So since I found that the React sample exists, I'm running the install command on it here. And you'll see just for a second, it actually printed out some npm output. And the reason why is we're actually just invoking the npm command line to do this. We don't need any smarts in Zowe itself. We're just telling the npm program, go and fetch this for us. So you can see also here that when I installed the React sample plugin, that it installed the Angular sample plugin too, because the dependency chain said that both were required. And you'll also see that installing automatically enabled both plugins. So if we go and look in this config file, we'll see at the bottom of my file that I now have those new extensions and they say enabled true. So once I have them, they should appear in my extensions folder, just like any other extension, regardless of where you got it from, it's going to show up there. And at the end of the day, it's just a normal Zowe server extension. Even though it came from npm, there's nothing that's been tampered with. So it is just the same extension that we used to ship with Zowe, and now you can find it through this instead. Now, once you have the extensions installed, at some point you may want to upgrade them or remove them or even confirm that they're installed, which is what I'm doing in this demo here. I've run the search command again because one of the interesting things here is that the search command will tell you if what you're looking for is already installed and what version it's at. And you'll see in this demo that I made sort of a happy mistake here of accidentally mixing and matching the versions where I declared to npm that this was version 2.6, but to Zowe 2.0.1. And so I will explain why that happened and how you can avoid it in the Zowe runtime directory itself. If you want to take an extension and, whoops, sorry, I lost my context in this video here. If you want to take an extension and put it into the npm registry, it turns out that npm has a manifest file that's a little bit different from Zowe's, but a lot of the properties are the same. So in the utils directory here of a Zowe install, we wrote a little program here called manifest to npm package, where if you already have a Zowe extension and you want to put it into npm, we're making your life a little bit easier here because we wrote a little script for you that if you give this script your Zowe extension, it will spit out a package.json file that you can use for npm. And so the reason that I have that version mismatch in that example here is apparently I didn't use this program, because if I had, it would have made the versions identical, since it would simply copy and paste from one file to the other here. So just one more thing in this demo. If I were to uninstall, we should see the recursive install, in that since I've installed two plugins when I only asked for one, I should see that they're both removed. And they do get removed, but only because the angular sample is not a dependency of something else. If it were, then it wouldn't have been removed. Also at this time, if you uninstall, your components get marked as disabled, which means that basically your extensions settings are preserved so that if you were to reinstall later, you would have those settings so you wouldn't need to start from scratch. So that's the demo. The only thing that I didn't show here is the upgrade command. The upgrade command comes in two flavors, essentially, a dry run and a not dry run. And the dry run is pretty useful for doing upgrade checks. You can say ZWE components upgrade all with the dry run parameter, and it will check how many of every single extension you have can be upgraded. And then you'd know before committing to it. So really quickly here, if you want to add a different registry other than NPM, if you think this is a cool feature, but NPM isn't what you use, it's not very hard to add a different handler. Basically, handlers are standalone JavaScript files that are given input in the form of environment variables to do whatever action is requested, and then should be returning an output on standard out that contains the value ZWE CLI parameter component file equals some comma separated list of things that you either installed or uninstalled. So when I say that handlers are JavaScript files, I don't mean Node.js files. What I mean is simply ECMAScript 2020 compatible JavaScript modules. ZWE has a built-in JavaScript engine which isn't as complex as Node.js, but it's also lighter weight and zero dependency. And so that's the context in which these run. So they're just plain old JavaScript. These, in the case of NPM, the NPM handler would be called with the environment variable CWE CLI registry command. It could say install. And then component name would say which component name I should be installing. Dry run tells me whether or not to actually write anything to disk. And then the registry parameter tells me which URL to go to try and get this component. And in the case of the React demo, when I asked for one thing and got two instead, that means that the parameter component file argument at the end here was a comma separated list of two items because I installed two things. So the input just was the string React sample, but the output was two paths on disk because NPM downloaded the paths and extracted its content. And so now ZWE does not need to care how they got there. It just needs to know that the package manager has put something there that Zowe can now use. So the other side of the equation is how do the packages even get onto NPM to begin with? And that's really the, I think, last part of all of this is basically the aha moment for this whole enhancement was that even though certain package managers and package registries out there are normally domain specific, such as that NPM is usually for Node.js libraries, it turns out that you can coerce NPM to store any kind of code that you want because NPM packages can contain any content that you want. So what we realized is that the best way to preserve extensions as is to take the archives of whatever Zowe extension that you currently have and just put it inside of an NPM package. So the simple onboarding that you can do to take your existing product and put it onto an NPM registry that Zowe could then use is get your existing Zowe extension archive, preferably PAX because it has file tagging preservation, and put it inside of a folder with a file called package.json. And you can see here package.json has some pretty simple properties, just saying what is the name of the thing, what's its version number, et cetera, et cetera. This very closely aligns with the manifest.yaml of extensions. So you can use that tool that literally just copies from one to the other. But the key here is the main property. This main property is normally used for Node.js to figure out where to find the top level JavaScript object. But we've repurposed the main argument to say whether the Zowe extension is an archive and where it's located, or if the main is not an archive, then we consider the entire folder itself to be the Zowe extension. So it's all based on looking at the main. And again, on part number 4 here, I also mentioned that we need some kind of hint that tells the user that this NPM module is meant for Zowe and not for Node.js or some other purpose. And so I think as time goes on, we'll see more direction here, maybe part of a conformance program to say what is that best way. But at the time here, I've been using keywords to differentiate. You can see here that I wrote the keyword Zowe. At the end of this presentation, there's links to the code, the original pull request, there's other recordings. But if you wondered how it worked or wanted to build your own enhancement to this, this is where you should start. But yeah, that is my presentation. So I'm actually going to turn it back over to Rose to finish up the slides, and then we can take some questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sean. I do not see any questions in the Q&A or the chat at the moment, but that doesn't mean, as I say that, one just came in.
Okay, yep, I see it now. So I'll just answer it here. It says,
okay.
When you installed the React sample app, the Angular sample app was installed as a dependency. And as they both were installed in config, or enabled in config during installation. But Angular sample is also a standalone app, and I may use it separately. So what if I want to get rid of React sample, but want to keep using Angular sample? So the first answer to that is basically we are inheriting the behavior of the NPM package manager default behavior. We could do something different with a different handler, but in the case of the NPM default behavior, the way it works is if you explicitly asked to install something, it's never going to get removed unless you explicitly ask for it to be removed. But because the Angular plugin got installed as a result of the React one getting installed, it's tracked as something that the user didn't directly want and is only there for dependency reasons. And that's why it would be removed at the same time as the thing that the user originally asked for. If you wanted both plugins, you need to install them both. So in the case of the Angular sample, you can install it directly too. And I believe if you have it installed as a dependency already, and then just ask to install it explicitly, it'll mark it as now something that you shouldn't remove. So I think that's the behavior, but essentially, we're just inheriting whatever NPM does here. So if I'm wrong about that, then we could always change that behavior by making a different handler. So second part of your question here is, what if we will not enable the apps that are only dependencies of another app by default? That's an interesting question. So in the case of the Angular app, the React app needed it as a runtime dependency. And so they both should be enabled. Otherwise, the React app's going to fail to run. But there are potentially things that don't need a runtime dependency, but rather an on-disk dependency. And I am not sure how we would know the difference at that time, at this time, but it's something to think about at least. So you say here anyway, if a dependency app is enabled in the config, then could that be an indication that you want to keep it? That could be an indication, but I guess the fact that we need to enable both of them as a result of a runtime dependency, we would not know in this particular case. So my recommendation would still be, if you want to keep both, explicitly say that you want to install them, which I think is not actually going to change the contents because both are already installed, but would rather hint to NPM that you want to keep both of them. I hope that makes sense. Okay, he says, got it. Thank you. Any other questions?
I am not seeing any. Okay, so I will move forward, but meanwhile, Sean, just keep monitoring if you wouldn't mind, and that way we can address them as we go. Just a couple more things I want to make everybody aware of. We have this new to you upcoming events, ongoing commitments section that we usually include in all of our quarterly updates. I wanted to first make you aware of a couple of Zowe.org improvements. Specifically, if you go to Zowe.org right now, you'll notice hopefully a new and improved landing page where we've got more visible tabs, a collapsible announcement banner. So when you visit the site, for example, you'll see just one more recent announcement versus all of the announcements. If you want to expand them, you can just click on the arrow and you'll see all of the announcements there. We are looking to refresh the intro video that should be going live any moment now. We've come a long way since we produced that video a couple of years ago now, and we'll be refreshing that video. We're hoping also that you'll see a little bit less intrusive question of the month. For those of you who have been visiting regularly, you will have noticed that we added this question of the month that was a little bit obtrusive when you landed there, and we tried to make it a little more comfortable, while at the same time encouraging you to click on that and provide us some feedback month over month. We have new questions there. Also, we have a new indicator on our upcoming and recent events. We realized that it was difficult to determine, well, what's already passed and what's coming up and what should I be looking at attending to possibly interact with some of the Zowe community. And we added this little green check mark for items that were coming up, items in the future versus something that's already passed. For example, the Share Atlanta conference that we concluded last week. And then finally, just wanted to make you all aware that we did publish and we will continue to publish the one-year roadmap for Zowe. We update it every quarter during our PI planning. That is available right now within the announcements section. So if you go to the Zowe announcements, you expand those announcements and you see the interested in Zowe current and future plans, download the Zowe roadmap. If you click that link, you will in fact begin that download of the PDF of the one-year Zowe roadmap for all of the active squads. Also, in an effort to try to help everyone to understand what's all going on within Zowe, we tend to refer to all of the items that are included within Zowe as components. Within the community, they're officially known as projects. And we've added a project tile for all of the projects that are currently active, currently being worked on by someone within the community. So we've tried to make it easier for you to also understand what is the life cycle designation along with each of those projects. So in addition to the name of it, a quick screen capture of what the UI might look like, And then, a short, concise description. We've added the life cycle designation. Where is this project as it relates to, is it technical preview? Is it generally available? Is it covered under long-term support, deprecated, or archived? We're trying to make it very clear and obvious to you at what state each of the projects is at. In addition, we have a project designation so that you will understand whether or not it's part of Zowe Core or if it's actually an extension to Zowe. So that's all available at the zowe.org landing page. Additionally, I just want to encourage all of you to be sure to participate in the question of the month. We try to keep it just one question where we're able to capture your thoughts, your feedback, your needs, if you will, with respect to what's going on within Zowe. And it helps all of us. It helps to guide the advisory council, but essentially the entire community as to where we should be headed next, where we're being effective, and items such as those. As it relates to what we're working on, I just wanted to also remind all of you, we mentioned this last time, I think, but want to update you that we do have a new item for consideration going on within Zowe. It's not an official component or extension. We have a work group dedicated to looking into something we're calling Zowe Event Management, whereby we're looking at a framework that Zowe could possibly develop that will allow off-host apps and tools, having them integrate with Zowe, I should say via Zowe, when a given mainframe event occurs. So something occurs on ZOS, the Zowe Event Manager is the intermediary technology, if you will, that manages those events and enables some kind of receiving application, receiving client, if you will, to be informed about that event so that it can determine if it should do something with it. And we want to do it in a more modern, in a more real-time manner, as opposed to polling or traditional point-to-point integrations. Our March survey actually is centered around this technology and the work that we're doing around that. So we appreciate it if you could go out and go to zowe.org or just click on this link. This URL will take you to the Zowe Event Management Survey that's being conducted for March. Just a reminder that we're moving forward with all of the Zowe V2 active LTS releases. We're about to release 2.7. We expect to be real close, if not releasing that today. Actually, we're on target for that. And a maintenance release for 1.28 is not scheduled until next month sometime. We try to keep all of this news available at the Open Mainframe Project, along with some blogs that help keep all of you informed on what's happening with Zowe. Just posted a couple of the latest ones here. We are also about to go into another planning session. We have, before that, I just want to remind you all that we will have a system demo planned for March 20th. Assuming we go GA today, we will show all of you what's included in the 2.7 release in the Zowe 2.7 system demo scheduled for 9 a.m. on the 20th of this month. If you're interested in joining that, please go to the Open Mainframe Project Zowe Dev Calendar or reach out to any of us and we can get you that Zoom link. Here's our PI planning. Yes, we're about to go into planning for the upcoming quarter. We have an opening session on April 3rd, starting at 9. If you are at all interested in what's happening in the community, we highly recommend that you spend maybe less than an hour on the 3rd of April. Listen in on the Technical Steering Committee update along with the Zowe Advisory Council update, the conclusion from last quarter, and you can hear what all of the squads are planning for the upcoming quarter over the next hour. Highly encourage you to participate in that. if you're at all interested in where we're going or would like to influence where we're going. And if you'd like to meet with us in person, we were all at, well, most of us, I should say, were at Share last week over in Atlanta. We had a number of Zowe sessions. We were not able to secure a Zowe day. We're looking to do that in the upcoming Share in New Orleans. If you have an idea for a topic, if you have a specific interest in a topic, please do share that. Type it in the chat. We'll make note of that, try to accommodate all of the requests for sessions. We do tend to produce more technical sessions as we grow in maturity with Zowe, but we also have an opportunity to have you influence our roadmap at some of the sessions as well. So send us some topics of interest. In the meantime, if you're interested in learning what we're producing in more detail, we always try to produce blogs that are related to the work that we're doing or the work that we're planning. Be sure to visit medium.com/Zowe for all of the blogs and details around what we're doing, which Don reminds me that perhaps we should consider a blog for the App Store. Just a thought.
Yeah, perhaps.
If you want to engage with any of us, we're always available on Slack, and a nice, easy way for you to reach us if you're not familiar with the URLs is just go to zowe.org and click on community. It'll take you to a page where we have lots of links and an quick and easy way for you to determine how best to communicate with the appropriate members of either the squads or, if you're interested in just general information, you can always go to the onboarding squad and we'll make sure that we direct you to the right folks. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded. We have 2 years plus worth of quarterly webinars, and we've had various topics over the years. We've even had a couple of customers join us. We did so at the June 2022 quarterly update. All of the replays are available. We have a YouTube playlist where you can go and pull up any of those. And then finally, just wanted to mention that we are trying to do a better job at making everybody aware of these quarterly updates. We're planning on posting a calendar of upcoming quarterly updates. Right now, we have tentative plans for June, September, and December. Look for the registrations for those quarterly updates at our landing page in the announcement section, and we'll try to do a better job at planning these out, opening up the registrations earlier, and providing with more content as it relates to the features, functions that we're introducing within Zowe. And of course, we're preparing for V3 next year. So expect to see some information related to when you can expect that to be coming and what would be included in that. And I think, yes, that brings us to the end. I don't see any more questions. I think we're all set, Sean. Thanks so much. Great presentation. Thanks for joining us today, folks. Have a great day.